Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Derek L. Frierson. The information put out by authorities regarding this case states that the crime in question took place in 2015 on a night after the suspect had been drinking at a bar in the downtown Orlando area. After having a few too many, he apparently entered his vehicle to drive out of the downtown area. Already bad, for sure. The report continues on that he struck the rear of a vehicle which was stopped for a red light at the intersection of East Colonial Drive and North Mills Avenue. When he impacted, it is said that his car was traveling at 55 miles per hour, which is 88.5 kilometers per hour, and that it made no attempts to avoid the crash. This crash caused the death of one person in the vehicle that was sitting at the red light, along with another one of the passengers to become paralyzed from the waist down, while the other 3 in the vehicle all sustained other injuries as well. Derek was found to have had a blood alcohol level of 0.215 that night, which is over 2.5 times the legal limit to drive, and not only this, but he also is said to have had prior DUI convictions in Florida as well as Missouri. Unfortunately, authorities have reported that since this crash, Derek has left the Orlando area and is currently trying to evade these charges. There is an active warrant out for his arrest pertaining to multiple charges, all as a result of this accident. In our number 9 spot today, we have Harry Dana Braswell Jr. Okay, so for this one, we have to take it back in time a bit to Harry's initial arrest, which was on February 22nd, 1975. Harry was arrested for taking the life of John Robbins. Basically, a couple days before his arrest, on February 19th, Harry and 3 accomplices entered John's home, tied him to the bed, and took his life. Everyone involved in the crime was arrested at the same time as Harry, and subsequently, they were sentenced to life in prison. This obviously doesn't sound like someone who is on the loose, so what could have happened? Well, after serving 8 years of his sentence, Harry escaped. In 1983, at the Sumter Correctional Institute, Harry hid himself inside one of the cabinets that he and another inmate were loading onto a truck inside of the facility. Once the truck left the facility, he and the other inmate jumped off of the truck and voila, they had escaped. While the other inmate was later recaptured in Oregon, Harry was never able to be located and he remains at large. In our number 8 spot today, we have Joseph Obregon. Joseph has been wanted by the Tampa Police Department for the last year at least, but the crime at hand took place back on December 5th, 2017. Joseph was initially arrested after he caused a crash after allegedly racing his Dodge Ram pickup truck against another. This is of course already a crime, but things turned so much worse when, as he allegedly raced, he also crashed into an uninvolved Toyota RAV4 that was carrying 2 occupants. Because of the crash, one passenger, Bill Swartz, who is 78 years old, passed away at the scene. His wife Jane, who is 58 years old and was with him, ended up passing away at the hospital on January 20th, 2018. As a result of all of the charges brought against him, Joseph was set to appear in court on September 17th, 2021 after a plea deal was reached. Despite this seemingly initial early cooperation, Joseph failed to appear in court, after which a no-bond warrant for his arrest was issued. In our number 7 spot today, we have Alfredo Acevedo. On June 9th, 2001, Alfredo was traveling southbound on State Road 93, which is on Interstate 75 in Charlotte County, and he was driving a 1984 white Chevrolet van. According to the statement the authorities put out while traveling in this vehicle, Alfredo had a blood alcohol content that was almost twice the legal limit. This of course led to him losing control of the vehicle, which ended up overturned. At the time of this crash, Alfredo wasn't alone in the vehicle and instead had a few passengers with him. As a result of the crash, 2 passengers in the vehicle died and 2 others sustained incapacitating injuries. Despite the clear severity of the crash as well as the horrifying injuries sustained, Alfredo is still wanted by the Florida Highway Patrol to answer for his involvement in this crash. In our number 6 spot today, we have Gaspar de Gaspar. On February 3rd, 2015, Gaspar was traveling in a 1996 yellow Thomas passenger bus when he pulled into the Marathon gas station in Indiantown. This small community was shocked that day for what transpired next. As Gaspar was backing the bus into the parking lot, there were 2 men sitting on a bench in front of the station. For reasons that no one is exactly sure of yet, the bus didn't stop and instead ended up striking both men, leaving one pinned between the station and the bus. Unfortunately, this led to the man passing away at the scene. Gaspar is said to have exited the bus after this horrific moment, but instead of sticking around, he apparently fled the scene. Others have identified him as being from the town, but no one is entirely sure where he went. there is an active arrest warrant out for him for a hit and run. In our number 5 spot today, we have Uriel Aguilar. The incident involving this man is said to have taken place on June 26, 2008, when Uriel ran into another man named Pedro Trevino at the Prime supermarket in Mulberry, Florida. The men knew each other because they were co-workers, and there was a bit of a rocky history there because it is said that they had prior altercations with one another. Authorities reported that as Uriel and his brother were leaving the store, Pedro approached them and challenged Uriel to a fight. Uriel agreed to the fight, and when he went to meet Pedro in the parking lot for it, he also brought a weapon along with him. The two began fighting, and this is when Uriel used this weapon against Pedro, which ended up taking his life. After the fight, authorities claimed that Uriel fled the scene and was last seen in the area of Sparkman Road in Plant City before disappearing. Uriel still has an active warrant for this crime. In our number 4 spot today, we have Augustin Lara Nunez. Augustin is another one of those people who caused an accident and decided to flee the scene, fleeing the consequences of their own actions. On October 22, 2006, he was driving a 2006 silver Ford truck westbound on State Road 82. As he traveled, he encountered the scene of a prior crash that unfortunately involved a fatality. As a result of this previous crash and the investigation that needed to take place, there was a Lee County deputy who had positioned her marked patrol car facing south in the westbound lane with emergency lights activated, and a detour to avoid this accident had been set up. Like I mentioned, Augustin ended up allegedly coming across it, so it's clear that he wasn't paying attention or just flat out ignored the detour. This ended in the front of his vehicle striking the deputy's vehicle, which sadly ended in fatality for the officer. As a result of this crash, Augustin was charged with DUI involving death, and of course a felony arrest warrant was put out, but despite this, he has yet to be located and brought to justice. It is currently believed that he likely fled the country, but authorities are still on the lookout should he ever try and return to the United States. In our number 3 spot today, we have Jose Arturo Palomino. On February 28, 2009, Jose was driving south of Sample Road in Pompano Beach on I-95 southbound in a 1996 silver Mitsubishi Eclipse. During this time driving, Jose ended up striking and killing a 23-year-old woman who was standing next to her vehicle on the shoulder of the roadway. This is of course tragic, and unfortunately accidents do happen, but it's what happened next that turns this into an even bigger thing. Jose is said to have chosen to leave the scene of the crime. He fled the scene of the accident and later abandoned the car that he was in a field. Turns out that the car he was driving wasn't even his, as he took to calling the owner, explaining that it had been in an accident and that he was sorry for taking it without permission. Despite the time it's been, however, authorities have been unable to locate Jose in order to arrest him on the warrant of leaving the scene of a crash involving a death. Authorities believe it is highly possible that he has since left the country. In our number 2 spot today, we have Victor Hernandez. Victor has been on the run since 2018 as he is wanted for taking someone's life. On March 11, 2018, it is said that Victor killed another man by the name of Luis L. Herrera Kindlin. This crime took place in Miami, and since the incident, Victor hasn't been found. In the poster about how Victor is wanted, authorities revealed that not only should he be treated as being armed and dangerous, but he also has one identifying feature about him, and that is the fact that he has a stoma in his throat. Right now, there is a reward for any tips that lead to his arrest. Right now, the Miami-Dade Florida Keys Crime Stoppers is offering a reward of up to $3,000, so if anyone has any information, they should definitely reach out to them to share, and all the tips will remain anonymous. In our number 1 spot today, we have Eric John Ritters. Eric is a wanted man and has been for quite a while now, since an incident that occurred on November 8, 2002. Basically, that night Eric was traveling in a 1999 Oldsmobile northbound on Florida State Road 423, and he was going quite fast, definitely a lot faster than he should have been. As he sped, he allegedly lost control of the vehicle and ended up striking another car that was legally stopped. The front of Eric's car ended up hitting the driver's side door of the other vehicle, which caused significant damage, as well as very sadly led to fatal injuries for the driver, as well as the 2 other occupants of the vehicle that Eric hit. Eric was not only driving while intoxicated, but he was also going approximately 97 miles an hour at the time of the incident, despite it being a 45 mile per hour zone. I had to convert it to kilometers kilometers to get the full magnitude of the speed, so if you're like me, that's about 156 kilometers per hour in a 72 kilometer per hour zone. Despite these extensive injuries and the loss of life, Eric completely disappeared and still has 3 active warrants out for his arrest.
And we're obviously going to start at number 10 now with Alexis Flores. This guy is a fugitive from Honduras who was added to the FBI's most wanted list on June 2nd, 2007. He's wanted for the kidnapping, rape and murder of 5-year-old Iriana de Jesus. It happened in Philadelphia in 2000. Flores had been living as a homeless drifter under the fake name of Carlos. He was given work as a handyman in a local park. The park gave him shelter and clothing as well. On August 3rd of that year, 5 days after 5-year-old Iriana de Jesus had been reported missing, she was found dead in that very same basement that Flores had been given as his shelter. Police questioned the actual owner of the basement who told them about Flores. When they went to go and find him though, he was missing. Ever since then, he's been on the run. Amazingly, police in Arizona actually arrested him in 2002 for possession of forged documents. They never made the link to the previous case though, and instead deported him to Honduras. In 2006, his DNA sample from Arizona was positively matched to the crime scene in Philadelphia. The following year, he was then added to the FBI's most wanted list. He is considered armed and dangerous and could be in Honduras or even back in the US.
The youngest guy currently on the FBI top 10 list, we have Alejandro Roselos Castello at number 9. He is an American criminal that is only 17 years old, and he killed a 23-year-old woman. That woman was someone Alejandro dated. This teenager is very dangerous.
The FBI is offering a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading directly to the arrest of alleged murderer Alejandro Castillo. The 18-year-old is the latest addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list.
The murder took place in Charlotte, North Carolina back in 2016. And ever since then, the police and the FBI are unable to track this kid down. Number 8, do you guys remember Kony 2012? Well, Joseph Kony is known as the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army that is responsible for abducting as many as 2 million people. Is this real life right now? Kony also forced some of these children to kill their own parents. Well, the war against Kony started in 2012. $800 million was spent to try to track this man down, but over the years, there was no successful to kill or capture this man. There was a YouTube video talking in detail about who Kony was and the massive problem happening in our society because of this man. The video was titled Kony 2012 and it currently has over 100 million views.
If they knew, Kony would have been stopped long ago.
Let the world, let the international community take justice to him there. Follow him wherever he is. First, to rescue our children. And secondly, to deliver the justice.
We are determined to cooperate with any friend of Uganda to ensure that this mindless killing and slaughter is ended.
Alright, moving on to number 7 now, we have Jason Derek Brown. This fugitive from LA has been on the FBI's most wanted list since July 2007 for a first-degree murder and armed robbery that occurred 3 years prior. In 2004, Robert Keith Palomares, a 24-year-old armored truck guard, was carrying the weekend deposits outside a theater in Phoenix. At 10 a.m., Brown ambushed him with a gun, shooting him in the head 5 times. Brown then took a bag containing $56,000 in cash and fled down an alley on a bicycle. Palomares was transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. Within a week, police had issued an arrest warrant for Brown. He fled to Nevada, then California, then Oregon before disappearing completely off the grid. Police have 200 leads about where he might be, although they often conflict with each other. He could be in the US, Canada, or even France or Thailand. The FBI is now offering up to $200,000 for information leading to his capture. Next up on number 6 now, we have Yasser Abdel Said. This Egyptian man is a US resident wanted for the 2008 murder of his own teenage daughters, Amina and Sarah. He was an abusive and controlling father who stalked their every move, watching to see if they dishonored the family somehow. When he suspected that one of his daughters, Amina, was in a relationship, he moved the entire family to a new home. The 2 girls and their mother ended up fleeing from Yasser after Christmas 2007. Eventually though, their mother convinced them that they should return back home to him. On January 1st, 1st, 2008, he greeted them with a kiss and took them out in his taxi, telling them he wanted to have dinner with them. He then pulled over and shot both girls to death in the back of his taxi cab. Amina died instantly, while Sarah managed to call the police before she also succumbed to her injuries. Yasser vanished. The FBI thinks he may be driving a cab in New York. On December 4th, 2014, he was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list with a $100,000 reward for any information leading to his arrest. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Dawood Ibrahim. Meet the most wanted man in India. Ibrahim is the head of a 5,000 strong organized crime network called the D Company. Now they're responsible for everything from drug trafficking to contract killings in countries such as India, Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates. Ibrahim is personally wanted on charges of murder, extortion, targeted killing, drug trafficking and terrorism, to name but a few. In 2003, he was designated as a global terrorist with head money of $25 million US. According to Washington, it's thought he uses the same smuggling routes as Al-Qaeda and has worked with them on multiple occasions. He's thought to have been involved with them in the November 2008 Mumbai attacks, bombings which killed 257 people and wounded 713 more. It's thought that he's also linked to the Bollywood film industry. There have been multiple reports of him financing movies, but also threatening producers to get what he wants.
Alright, moving on to number 4 now, we have John Patrick Hannan, who is actually known as the world's most successful prison fugitive, who has been on the run for the past 60 years. That's a 6-0. John Hannan was just 22 years old when he was arrested and put into jail. He was sentenced for 21 months behind bars for stealing a car and assaulting 2 police officers. But he was able to break out of the facility just 30 days after. This guy is either a super genius or just a big dum-dum. I say super genius because he was able to be on the run for the past 60 years. And I say he's a big dum-dum because who escapes from prison when you only have to serve a 21-month sentence? Good behavior might even have gotten him out earlier, who knows?
Next up, number 3 now, we have Semyon Mogilovich. This Ukrainian-born man is a Russian mafia boss, or rather, he is the boss of bosses. He is at the helm of most Russian mafia syndicates in the world. His vast empire has resulted in the FBI referring to him as the most dangerous mobster in the world. Mogilovich is involved in weapons trafficking, contract murders, extortion, drug trafficking and prostitution on an international scale. He hasn't lived a very secretive life either, and his homes and private life are all there to see on his Wikipedia page. The problem for international law enforcement is how well connected and protected he is. In 2006, former Russian Secret Service member Alexander Litvinenko alleged that Mogilovich had a good relationship with a Russian president known as Vladimir Putin. Litvinenko was assassinated via radiation poisoning not long after that allegation. He used to be on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, but was removed back in 2015. This is because the USA and Russia doesn't actually have an extradition treaty, meaning Russia is not obliged to hand him over to the US if they do catch him, basically making him untouchable. Next up at number 2 now, we have Shane O'Brien. He's a suspected killer who has been on the run for 2 years from UK police. He's now on Interpol's worldwide most wanted list. The 30-year-old is alleged to have murdered 21-year-old Josh Hanson in an unprovoked knife attack in a bar in West London in 2015. According to witnesses, O'Brien removed an item from his coat pocket and plunged it into Josh's neck. He was pronounced dead at the scene. A £50,000 reward is now being offered for any information leading to his prosecution. He's described as white, 6 feet tall, with grey eyes, dark brown hair, a full beard, and a tattoo on his back of an owl holding a skull.
And finally, at number 1, we have Robert William Fisher, who appears on the FBI most wanted list. If you find this man and catch him, you will be rewarded at least $100,000, which is why people actually make it their career finding these type of people who have bounties on their heads. Getting back to Robert William, he is wanted for the 2001 murder of his wife Mary and their 2 children. Robert Fisher then blew up his residential home in Scottsdale, Arizona. Investigators believe he murdered his family because he felt threatened by his wife's intent to divorce.
Justice for a Scottsdale mom and her 2 kids after they were horrifically killed. Now, 15 years later, the images of that crime continue to capture the nation's attention.
It's been about 17 years, and still the FBI doesn't know his whereabouts. The question is, how smart is this guy to be able to live another life for all these years? Robert is also currently the longest lasting person currently on the FBI most wanted list. So think about that. The FBI most wanted list, they put a lot of resources into finding that person, but yet they just can't find this guy.
Coming in at number 10, the Eastbound Strangler. Back in 2006, one fateful night, this monster took the life of 4 women and was never seen from again. The Eastbound Strangler targeted 4 New Jersey escorts and left them behind the Golden Key Motel, face down, in a row, facing east and about 60 feet apart from each other. The victims were left fully clothed, minus having their socks and shoes removed, and all appeared to have been killed in the same way. Early on, there was speculation that it could have been linked to the Long Island Killer, another unknown attacker, but it was later ruled out by investigators. Despite 15 years of investigation, they have never been able to come close to any leads, and whoever was responsible has never been caught, and the $25,000 reward remains unclaimed. Next up at number 9, the Texas Killing Field. Now, what would seem like a normal 25-acre patch of land just off the highway near Houston, Texas, is actually a haunting field where more than 30 bodies have been found since the early 1970s. Nearly all of the victims found have been young women and girls, and there are apparently many more missing women from the area, but no remains beyond the 30 victims have ever been recovered. Despite the authorities' best effort, it is unknown how many perpetrators have actually contributed to this field, though it's suspected that more than one person is responsible. To date, only 3 of the cases have been successful in convicting an attacker, and the remaining 27 remain unsolved, with no leads and no luck of where to turn next. In 2011, a film entitled Texas Killing Fields was made about the series of crimes associated with the notorious plot of land, but it was not received well, and unfortunately did not kickstart anything more than upset families of the victims and a few false confessions to the atrocities. Coming in at number 8, the Flat Tire Murderer. Active between 1975 to 1976, this monster is believed to have been responsible for between 12 to 35 deaths, though the exact number is still unknown. The perpetrator got his name as allegedly he would offer to help women traveling alone who had gotten a flat tire, but unbeknownst to them, it was the attacker who had deflated their tires in the first place. While not all victims followed this exact formula, it was certainly the method for the first of his 2 victims. Bodies of the victims were found dumped into canals, while their cars were found abandoned miles away. Authorities believe the cause of their deaths to have been from drowning, and were all found with signs of being taken advantage of prior to their death. Over the years, with no culprits being found for these vicious attacks, some have suggested it could have been the work of notorious Ted Bundy, but that's merely speculation and has no evidence to back it up. For all we know, the Flat Tire Murderer remains on the loose. Coming in at number 7, the Honolulu Strangler. Credited with being responsible for the death of 5 women, this unidentified killer was active only between 1985 to 1986 and was never caught. The sadistic perpetrator was known to target women, but that seems to be where the links stop. All of his victims were brutally attacked and taken advantage of, and then left tied up on the street to be found by police. Authorities took this case very seriously, as at the time it was the first known repeat criminal of his kind in Honolulu. Local authorities put together a 27-person task force, but even with all that manpower, they were never able to find the attacker. There was hope when a man named Howard Gay was arrested, as he seemed to fit the profile, but he was eventually released after further interrogation. Years later, in 2017, the case was covered by a true crime podcast, and once again in 2022, but despite its popularity, we have no idea what happened to the Honolulu Strangler. Next up at number 6, the West Mesa Bone Collector. Back in 2009, a woman on a leisurely walk with her dog came across something peculiar, a human bone. Little did she know, she'd actually stumbled upon a major crime scene. Upon her discovery, authorities became immediately involved and discovered that it was a mass grave filled with human remains. Nicknamed the West Mesa Bone Collector, this killer was active between 2001 and 2005 and was a truly sick man. He was known to target young women, usually Hispanic, and almost always involved in late night services or with connections to the drug trade, but not exclusively, making it hard to identify just why he chose the victims he did. The thing is, during 2001 to 2005, there were reportedly more missing persons than usual, but I guess the New Mexico police didn't feel much need to dive into the disappearance of women involved in this type of work. While we know practically nothing about the killer, we do know that he is responsible for the deaths and that he would take the bodies to the desert to dispose of them. After years of police investigation, the remains of 11 women were found scattered in the deserts of Albuquerque, but the exact way they died is yet to be discovered, as medical examiners and forensic experts have not been able to identify his methods, which is very unusual. Police and FBI have never been able to track down who is responsible for ending these young women's lives, and the monster remains on the loose. Coming in at number 5, the Frankfurt Slasher. Between 1985 and 1990, this monster preyed upon women in a rough neighborhood in Philadelphia. The Frankfurt Slasher was known for being incredibly violent, mutilating the victims' bodies past recognition. What was designed to be on the inside of the body, like organs and muscle tissue, would often end up exposed, and then after having his way with the victims, he would leave them on the street, strategically posed for when the police would find them. Believed to be responsible for the death of 9 women, the Frankfurt Slasher targeted specifically white women, usually ladies of the night, with a public history of mental illness. But oddly, the ages of the victims ranged from 28 all the way to 68. One man, Leonard Christopher, was convicted of one of the crimes in 1990, but more happened once he was put away, causing concern that maybe they'd found the wrong man. Further, significant questions have popped up regarding the quality of evidence they used to convict Christopher. He apparently did not match witness reports of the white man seen with other victims, leaving many in fear that the Frankfurt Slasher remains uncaught and unidentified. Next up at number 4, the Chicago Strangler. Between 2001 to 2018, a reported 75 Chicago women all lost their lives the same way: suffocation. But it wasn't until 2019 that a task force was made to try and stop these killings from happening. Originally, authorities denied that there was any link of the crimes and denied it all being one person committing them, hence the delay in gathering a task force. But after an article from the Chicago Tribune ran in 2018, they were forced to admit that it was in fact a distinct possibility. As was uncovered in the 2018 article, there was in fact a few distinct links between the crimes. All the victims were women, all the victims were killed the same way, and nearly all the victims were black. Coincidence or not, the optics were very bad, as it seemed the authorities were not taking the death of black women seriously, and the task force was created. Then in 2021, a docuseries on Discovery Plus began streaming, and though activists were demanding answers from the Chicago Police Department, they still maintained they could neither confirm nor deny if the killings were from a repeat convict. We still have no clue who killed these women, and they still remain out in the world walking free. Next up at number 3, the I-70 killer. You wouldn't think the shopping mall off the highway would be a dangerous place to be or get a job, but in the spring of 1992, it very well could have been. 30 years ago, along the Interstate 70, or I-70, an unidentified man was responsible for the death of 6 store clerks who all had the same thing in common. They all worked in a shop off the same highway, they were all brunettes with long hair, and they were mostly all women, except for one man, but he too had long hair and wore a ponytail, and police suspected the killer mistook him for a woman from behind. The attacker oddly didn't seem too interested in anything but taking their lives, as he rarely robbed the stores after, and if he did, he would maybe take $100. After one of the attacks, a customer actually walked in the store and caught him, the 2 victims on the floor, and the attacker still with the weapon in his hand. But fearing for his life, he ran away as fast as he could, and in shock, didn't call the authorities until nearly an hour later. well after the man had escaped the scene. A few years later, in 1994 Texas, 2 similar attacks took place, and then again in 2001 Indiana. The cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and Dark Minds, but the man has never been caught and remains walking among us to this day. Coming in at number 2, Hercules. While some say killer, others say vigilante. This perpetrator separates themselves from the rest. The distinction between Hercules and, say, the Frankfurt slasher? Well, Hercules only attacks those who have already committed a brutal crime. Or rather, one very specific brutal crime, taking advantage of women. In 2019, 3 men were found in Bangladesh, each shot and each with a note tied around their neck. While not identical, all the notes followed the same structure. First stating the name of the victim whose neck the note was wrapped around, followed by the name of the victim who they had attacked. It would then explain that this was the fate of those who committed this crime and that others should beware. Signed, Hercules. Law enforcement has yet to uncover who is responsible for these deaths, but have no clue if the killings are by one person or a group of people. It sure has sparked debate, with many questioning who the real bad guy is here. And last up today at number 1, Pedro Lopez. Nicknamed the Monster of Andes, Pedro Lopez might be one of the most notorious criminals alive. After being kicked out of his childhood home at just 8 years old for taking advantage of his younger sister, Lopez was evicted and sent to live the rest of his childhood on the streets of Colombia. According to Lopez, not long after he was thrown out, he was abducted and assaulted, and then by 13 was taken in by a family, but after 2 years ran away. By 1978, Lopez claims to have been responsible for the death of 100. That same year, an indigenous tribe caught him and was going to execute him, but a nearby missionary took pity on him and demanded they release him and call him into the authorities. The police, however, for whatever reason, promptly released him from custody. From there, he fled to Colombia once again, followed by Ecuador, where he reports to have attacked about 3 girls a week, and when he was caught and arrested in 1980, he confessed to killing 200 victims, but there's suspicion that it could have been worse, as many as 360. Though he did remain jailed for 14 years, in 1994 he was released from prison for good behavior and sent back to Colombia to serve the rest of his sentence in a psychiatric facility. But only 4 years later, in 1998, he was ruled legally sane and released on a $50 bail. Rather predictably, he fled the country after his release, and a warrant for his arrest was promptly released. His whereabouts remain a mystery, and no one knows if he has committed any more attacks since he vanished.
Number 10. The Long Island Killer. Active from 1996 to 2010, the Long Island Killer managed to avoid prison by simply avoiding being caught at all. When 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert called 911 in the summer of 2010, her only words were a simple, "They are trying to kill me." After that, Shannon was never seen again, prompting the Suffolk County Police Department to begin their search. On December of that same year, the police made a startling discovery. Along Ocean Parkway was a skeleton, packed away in a burlap bag and buried by snow. But that wasn't the only one they found. Over the course of the summer, more and more bodies were discovered by police, each one relating to a previous missing persons case, the oldest going back to 1996. The worst thing? While all of these bodies were found, their killer never was, and remains at large to this day. Their victims being Maureen Brainard, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, Jessica Taylor, an unidentified Asian person, Valerie Mack, 2 more unidentified women, and Shannon Gilbert. Number 9. Laszlo Sátori. Born in Austria-Hungary in 1915, Laszlo Sátori was hired as a member of the Royal Hungarian Police police in 1944. From there, he organized the deportation of over 15,000 Jewish people to Auschwitz. But when the war ended, he was tried for his crimes and sentenced to death. However, in 1949, Sottery made his escape to Canada, becoming a citizen 6 years later. He remained in the country for the next 40 years, but when it was discovered that he'd falsified his citizenship documents, Sottery was deported back to Hungary. He lived there for another 10 years, until reporters from the British publication The Sun revealed his address in July 2012. From there, a whirlwind of charges were pressed against him, the Justice Minister of Slovakia having readied a case. It was all for naught, however, as on August of 2013, Laszlo Sottery passed away from pneumonia, the 98-year-old war criminal having lived for nearly a century without knowing justice, and the families of his victims never knowing peace. Number 8. The Doodler. In 1974, the San Francisco area was struck with a series of murders that would continue for the next year and a half. Specifically targeting the patrons of gay bars, the Doodler received his nickname for making sketches of his victims prior to taking their life. All of the victims shared similar wounds, but not all of them did actually pass on. Several victims survived the attempts on their lives, but most of them refused to testify for fear of outing themselves due to the widespread homophobia of the time. As a result, Gerald Kavanaugh, Joseph Stevens, Klaus Christman, Warren Andrews, Frederick Kappen, and Harold Goldberg may never know peace. The case remains open to this day, with police having recently begun to use modern technology in an attempt to locate the Doodler. 7. Daji. Also known as Su Daji, this woman was the favored concubine of King Zhou of the Shang dynasty. Born in 1076 BC, Daji was born to the household of Yosu, which was captured by the Zhou and Daji taken as a trophy. With his love for her, Zhou went out of his way to do whatever he could to please his new mistress. As her time in the palace went on, Daji's requests became more depraved and violent. She began experimenting on the population, inventing new and increasingly brutal ways of executing her victims to sate her curiosity. Daji was executed by her lover's successor, King Wu of Zhou, later being used as the reason why King Wu took over the kingdom in the first place. Number 6. The Babysitter. From the time span of February 1976 to March of 1977, Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine Milhalik, and Timothy King went missing in Oakland County. Each time a child went missing, their bodies were found in open spaces, in front of office buildings, alongside roads, and dropped within ditches. Coroners determined that were tortured before their passing, each one showing signs of having been held by the killer. While DNA profiles were taken from the bodies, matches had never been found. Numerous people were suspected, and while several other deaths were suspected to be the work of the babysitter, none were ever completely connected. The case has been reopened multiple times, and while several other criminals have been caught as a result, the babysitter remains at large. Number 5. Joseph Kony. Founder and current leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, Joseph Kony is a terrorist that has been active in and around Uganda since 1987. A brutal Christian fundamentalist whose trademark has been his employment of child soldiers. Kony's victims range in the hundreds of thousands, though the exact number has never been confirmed, and his methods of indicting new soldiers is even more disturbing. A number of movements have been started with the end goal of capturing Joseph Kony, including Kony 2012, a massive online activist movement led by filmmaker Jason Russell. The United Nations and Ugandan government have also tried numerous operations to take down Kony. None have proven successful. However, according to recent reports, his forces have dwindled down from thousands to mere hundreds. And while he hasn't been captured yet, experts presume that it could happen any day. Number 4. Suharto. On the 1st of October, an organization of Indonesian revolutionaries assassinated 8 generals in an attempted coup d'etat. The Indonesian government's response to this was to immediately blame the Communist Party of Indonesia, better known as PKI. The leader of this movement was Suharto, who proceeded to kill anyone with even a passing association with PKI. These killings were supported by a number of Western powers, including the US. Starting in Jakarta, this purge swept across the country, with between 500,000 and 1 million victims in its wake. Suharto then seized the government for himself, assuming the title of second president of Indonesia. He completely upended the previous government, filling the staff only with those who supported him. He would rule for another 30 years before stepping down, never tried for his crimes, and passing away from multiple organ failure. Number 3. Pol Pot. Beginning life as Salith Sar, Pol Pot was a Cambodian communist revolutionary and the founder of the Khmer Rouge movement. Following the Cambodian Civil War, he took power as Prime Minister of Democratic Kampuchea, ruling for 2 years. His primary goal was to turn Cambodia into an agrarian socialist society, which he enforced through social control and cultural and lingual fascism. His most egregious act was the perpetration of the Cambodian genocide, a mass killing that resulted in the deaths of somewhere between 1.5 to 2 million civilians. He accomplished this through forced labor camps, where those seen as people against the state were sentenced to brutal work. They were also known as the killing fields, and when the Vietnamese army invaded, their soldiers found mass graves. In 1998, Pol Pot was captured, sentenced to life imprisonment, and placed under house arrest. While he officially died of heart failure, an American journalist present claimed that he had taken his own life when threatened with being tried by the US. Number 2. Jack the Ripper. This list wouldn't be complete without the famed Ripper. Active from 1888 to 1891, Jack the Ripper was responsible for the passing of a number of women in the Whitechapel area of London. The actual body count is strongly debated, as the original 7 victims were part of the Whitechapel killings, but whether or not the Ripper was responsible for those is unknown. 5 victims have been confirmed to have been his work: Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Edders, and Mary Jane Kelly. There were several other victims after these: Rose Milett, Alice Mackenzie, the Pinchin Street Torso, and Frances Coles, though their relation to the Ripper is also unconfirmed. Other killings could have been attributed to the case, but due to its high-profile nature, the police had to suspect that copycats may have come into play. In the end, Jack was never found, and his victims' families never saw justice. Despite this, Jack the Ripper has been immortalized in countless fictional settings and media, which may have been what he wanted in the first place. It may seem easy to place this man at the top of the list, but in a day and age where his ideas are beginning to spread through the Western political landscape again, it must be stated with absolute certainty that this man was utterly vile. His rise to power has been thoroughly documented. The leader of a homegrown fascist movement that utilized perceived losses of a cultural war as fuel for their takeover. Once in power, he led numerous movements poised at dividing and separating the populace through a regime of hate and misinformation. Appealing to his followers, this man thrived through fanaticism. This man forced his way into office through bullying, threats, and intimidation of both himself and his party members. This man has never gone to prison. Who is he? You already know.
Starting off this countdown, we have Elizabeth Wettlaufer.
I've done this, and I'm ready to face it, but I would love to go.
Elizabeth Wettlaufer was a Canadian registered nurse for 9 years in southwestern Ontario. In 2016, she quit her nursing job, checked herself into a psychiatric hospital, and confessed to her crimes. Apparently, between 2007 to 2016, she used her powers as a nurse to take the lives of 8 of her patients, and injured 6 others. She would do so by giving them lethal doses of insulin. She also admitted to stealing opioids to fuel her personal addiction. After she confessed to the killings, an interview took place with the police, and that's when she confessed her crimes once again, this time in a detailed statement. Apparently, she had voices in her head telling her to kill those patients.
Part of me had started to believe that it was the devil, and part of me thought it might be God, wasn't purpose through my life.
At first, she believed that this was God talking to her, so she felt okay killing for him. Then later on, she thought maybe it was the devil. On top of that, she claimed that it was a gut instinct telling her that these people needed to be killed. And once she did the deed, she would hear laughter in her chest.
Whatever it wasn't a voice in my head, it was a voice in here. And when I would do it, afterwards I would hear like a laughter in my head.
She was sentenced to 8 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. In our 9th spot, we have Robert Durst. Robert Durst is an American convicted murderer and possible serial killer. It all started in 1982 with the disappearance of his wife, Kathy Durst. Obviously, he was the main suspect. Then in 2000, he murdered one of his friends, Susan Berman, and in 2001, he killed his neighbor. And just this year, he was finally convicted for killing his wife. During his interviews and interrogations, he maintained his innocence, claiming that he never did it. But after one of his final interviews, he made a grave mistake. He went to the bathroom and didn't realize that his mic was still on. While in the bathroom, he was talking to himself and basically confessed to the killings.
There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course.
The interviewers were completely shocked by what they heard, and Robert was immediately arrested. In our 8th spot, we have Daniel Wozenak. Daniel Wozenak is a former community theater actor who in May of 2010 took the lives of 2 people. During that time, he was struggling financially. He was in debt and unemployed. Then when he heard that his friend Sam Herr had $62,000 from combat pay, he decided to kill Sam in order to steal his money. Then he ended up killing a woman named Julie Kabushi, a 23-year-old college student who was tutoring Sam. His plan was to make it seem like Sam killed Julie and then went on the run, but in the end, he was caught. This video is from the police interrogation of Daniel. Here's him putting the blame on Sam.
Opened the door, it was Sam. I'm like, hey man, what's going on? Everything good? And he's like, not good, we're in trouble. We need to get the out of here. And so we drove, he's like, there's a dead body in my apartment. He said he'd been doing some heavy drugs. He's like, I shot somebody. I was not happy about it. It was a fit of rage, and honestly, she had it coming. I said she.
But of course, the police weren't buying his story. It was all too convenient.
Where's the gun, Sam? What did you do with the gun?
I'm not Sam, my name's Dan.
I know, but that's what you heard. Wasn't that what you were asking him?
No, I had nothing to do with this because my life was in danger with my wife. I'm sorry.
How was your life in danger?
He threatened it.
The 2 interrogators could see through Daniel's act. In fact, they said it was as if he was putting on a theater show for them. In the end, Daniel did confess, but figured he might try and act insane in order to get off with lesser charges.
Money and insanity.
Money and insanity. Okay.
In our 7th spot, we have patient number 18. Now, this has got to be one of the creepiest and mysterious clips on the internet. It's an interview featuring a man named Patient 18. This interview is filmed at a psychiatric hospital, and this man is there because he has schizophrenia. This tape is actually what schools use to teach their students about schizophrenia and the mind. But it's mysterious because we don't know much about this dude. Now, I just want to say, having schizophrenia or mental health issues does not make this guy an evil person. He's on today's list because apparently at the hospital he admitted to taking someone's life. Plus, he has a history of criminal behavior. Upon doing more research, this might be a man named Stephen E. Anyways, take a look at this interview.
And what happened that ended up with your being here in the hospital?
The psychiatrist decided that this was the situation for me.
Did he tell you why?
No, the psychiatrist did not.
Has anybody told you why?
No.
I got chills. I don't know about you. It's quite interesting how he carefully plans out his answers. Plus, no matter what they're talking about, he still shows no emotion.
And in what way are you different?
I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do. And this influences my thinking and consequently my actions.
He may seem calm on the outside, but what you can't imagine is everything that's going on in his head. You can tell he's trying hard to stay in control.
As soon as I express the belief that I do not belong in this hospital, which is a mental hospital, then those who dislike me want to find a worse place for me.
In our 6th spot, we have Alonzo Perez. In 2016, Alonzo Perez was charged for a series of crimes, including robbery with use of a deadly weapon, attempted murder with use of a deadly weapon, grand larceny, and battery. He was also arrested in connection with the death of Mohammed Robinson. This is footage of Alonzo inside of the interrogation cell waiting to be questioned. But not much of that actually happens, as he manages to escape. First, we see him looking around at the cameras, and then he decides to forcibly remove his handcuffs. Now, he does manage to get them off, but he's not ready to leave yet. He hasn't thought of a plan. So he pretends that his handcuffs are still on and he thinks of an escape plan. When he thinks of his plan, he gets up, climbs up, and escapes by crawling through the ceiling. He then drove away in a rental truck that someone left with the engine running. But don't worry, it was short-lived freedom, because within days he was caught again, and in more trouble. In the end though, he did plead guilty to 3 murders. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Andre Chikatilo. Andre Chikatilo, otherwise known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Rostov Ripper, was responsible for the deaths of 56 individuals. He would lure people that he met at bus stops or train stations away to remote locations, and then he would murder them. Sometimes he would even eat certain parts of his victims. In this interview, what shocks a lot of people is the fact that everyone expects him to act like a monster, but in fact, he acts quite the opposite. He seems innocent, which is either an act or, his true personality. So he keeps up the innocent act, saying how he feels sorry, blah blah blah. But the act drops when he is asked one question. Now, the interview is in Russian, but I have the translation. So the interviewer asks him if he has ever thought about meeting his victims in heaven or hell. He answers with, and I quote, "No, I have never thought about that. Never. I feel like it doesn't bother me. I have never thought about it. I have already passed all rounds of hell in my life. I am already ready to pass away to the other world again." That right there is creepy, not gonna lie. In our 4th spot, we have David Berkowitz, but you probably better know him as the Son of Sam. He was a serial killer who took the lives of 6 individuals and wounded 7 others in New York City for more than a year. He would typically target good-looking young women with long brown hair. As a result, a number of women were cutting their hair short or dyeing it blonde. He was eventually known as the Son of Sam because he would leave letters near his victims' bodies, signing it off with that name. In the end, he was caught and claimed that his neighbor's dog was possessed by a demon, and that this demon dog was the one telling him to kill these people. Wild, I know. Well, years later, he did this interview. He admits to being into Satanism and how it influenced him.
Yeah. When you talk about Satan, what are you actually referring to?
Well, many people may not really understand that, but there was a time I was so confused and so troubled that I was seeking meaning and purpose. I was seeking something, I don't know, as my life began to spin out of control. I mean, I got involved in like Satanism, and I was reading the Satanic Bible. And
he continues on talking about himself, but a lot of people believe he was just putting on an act the whole time, that he was trying to convince people that he's normal so that he would be released early. This is pretty common among serial killers. They love to manipulate people.
How does it feel to be here for 30 years knowing that this is going to be it?
It's like, the expression, take one day at a time, and it's never easy, being incarcerated. I have no one to blame but myself.
In our 3rd spot, we have Michael Beaver. In July of 2015, 16-year-old Michael Beaver and his 18-year-old brother Robert took the lives of their parents and 3 siblings. They first attacked their sister. When she screamed, their mother ran out of the bedroom and they stabbed her over 50 times. Eventually, they worked their way around the house, killing their family members. It's a very scary and graphic case. In this interview, Michael completely confesses to everything to an officer.
So he was buying weapons because you guys had talked about murdering.
Yeah, and he started planning it.
Okay. That you didn't want to do it?
I don't want to do it. I didn't, just because I didn't kill anyone.
Okay.
I stabbed someone.
Who did you stab?
My younger brother, Christopher.
Christopher? How old is Christopher?
9, I think.
What'd you stab him with?
My knife.
What's your knife look like?
There's literally no emotion in his voice, and for being so young, he doesn't seem affected by this at all. But here's the thing, this guy was obsessed with other killers, and the police officer noticed this and kept prying.
Because you mentioned a couple names of, are those like serial killers or something?
What, like Columbine?
Yeah.
Columbine and James Egan Holmes. James Egan Holmes is a guy that shot at the theater.
In Colorado?
Yeah, he killed 12 and...
Wow. How many were killed in Columbine?
Columbine? I don't know, like 15,
okay.
I think.
He knew the killer's first and last names and their kill count. No one just knows that information off the top of their head, so that's creepy. In our second spot, we have the BTK killer. Between the years of 1974 to 1991, American serial killer Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 individuals. In 2005, he was convicted for his crimes and was sentenced to 175 years in solitary confinement without the possibility of parole. This video is Dennis's confession to killing Maureen Hedge.
So I very carefully snuck into the house, kind of like a cat burglar, and after checking the house, she wasn't there. So about that time, the doors rattled, so I went back to one of the bedrooms and hid back there in one of the bedrooms.
He then proceeded to talk about how he stayed in her house for hours until the next morning when he woke up and strangled her.
No, I manually strangled her when she started to scream.
So you used your hands?
Yes, sir.
And you strangled her? Did she die?
Yes.
It's chilling seeing him talk so casually about all of this. And in our number one spot today, we have Issei Sagawa.
たった指先ほどの小さな銃弾を放ったことによってさまざまな人たちを傷つけ、あるいは変えてしまう。
If you haven't heard of this case, then brace yourself because it's a very dark and gruesome one. In 1981, Issei Sagawa killed and ate a woman named Renee Hartfelt. Apparently, he always had a fantasy to eat a beautiful human. When he saw Renee, he knew she was the one. On June 11th, 1981, he invited her over, and then he shot her at the back of the neck and then ate her over the next 2 days. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is that he was never convicted of his crimes. He literally spent 2 days in jail, then was sent back to Japan, and then he became a celebrity there. He was so famous that he made a living through the public's interest in his crime. Imagine that, literally becoming wealthy for killing someone. He's guilty, he's even admitted to it, but he never got penalized. Here are some disturbing moments from an interview with him.
多分もう一晩でも食事をルネとしていたら食べる対象には考えたことはない。自分の書いたシナリオ、ずっと前からそういうシチュエーションを考えて、どっから食べる、どうやってやる、全てこう頭の中にシナリオができてた。
He continues on going into gruesome details about his murder and about another time that he attacked a different woman. I personally had a hard time sitting still watching this. It's just way too much.
Number 10, Tomás de Torquemada. Ever heard of the Spanish Inquisition? Well, this guy was one of its star killers. Not only do we wish it never happened in the first place, it did, so we might as well talk about it and learn from it. But we can't discuss the Inquisition without mentioning Tomás, who was responsible for thousands of deaths. He gave people two choices. Either join the Catholic Church or die, which led to thousands of Jewish and Islamic people being exiled from Spain. He played the role of inquisitor and was in charge of investigating and punishing heretics. He oversaw the burning of thousands of innocent people, as Tomás often used cruel methods of extracting confessions from people he believed to be heretics. He seemed to almost enjoy his job, hanging, burning, suffocating, and tormenting people with the rack and waterboarding. No one knows exactly how many people died during the Inquisition, but historians estimate anywhere between 30,000 to 300,000. Pretty wide gap there. Number 9, Caligula. Man, his name is too fun to say. Too bad he wasn't a fun guy. It's better I tell you now that essentially this list is a depiction of what happens when the wrong people get their hands on power. From 37 AD to 41 AD, Caligula ruled as if he was some kind of mad god that needed to be satisfied. Not only did his addiction to gambling cause a nightmare for the economy, he seemed to delight in suffering. In the first 3 months of his rule, he made his people sacrifice 160,000 animals in his name. When he first took over
over as ruler, people actually liked him though. He made helpful political reforms and recalled exiles, but most people blame his future tyranny on a brain fever that befell him later on. He blew money on lavish projects, some still helpful like aqueducts, to building a 2-mile-long floating bridge across the Bay of Bali so he could ride his horse across it day after day. He even ordered his men to attack the sea by collecting shells with their helmets. His lascivious love affairs included copulating with the wives of his allies and even allegedly his own sisters. Caligula's reign was equal parts terrifying and embarrassing, which is probably why his officers stabbed him to death. Number 8. Leopold II of Belgium. During the height of colonialism, Leopold of Belgium wanted to make his mark by conquering the African Congo. As soon as I said colonialism, you know where things are going, so get ready. He made it his property, and instead of, being a good human being, he decided to establish a dictatorship instead. He made the rest of Europe think that he was acting as a good guy, so they'd give him money, then proceeded to hire mercenaries. These mercenaries were set with the task of draining as much money from the state by enforcing free labor camps. Anyone who disobeyed or failed to meet demands were severely punished and even had their limbs removed. Leopold was responsible for the deaths of 20% of the population and thankfully was stopped before he could do more damage. Roger Casement, after doing a little digging, released a report which detailed the horrors he had committed under the guise of philanthropy. He was forced to surrender the Congo, though it was considered a part of Belgium until the 1950s. Whew, buckle up folks, it only gets worse from here. It's number 7 and we're already at Genghis Khan. Get ready. Genghis Khan, ruler of the Mongolian Empire, killed so many people. He changed the carbon footprint of the earth. In one single battle, he killed over 1.2 million people. Though this sounds like an exaggeration, I don't find it hard to believe, since he just left the corpses to rot. The battlefields became oily and whole mounds of mountains of bodies formed. Genghis Khan was supposedly responsible for over 40 million deaths. If you need a number to compare that to, that's the same amount of people who died in World War I altogether. He also enjoyed in excess the spoils of war, brutalizing women and assaulting them. In addition to that, he held mass beauty contests and all those who didn't win would be given to his soldiers like objects. Because of that, around 16 million people are said to be descendants of him today. That's how many people Many people blame his brutal and ruthless upbringing, as Khan very much had to raise himself under the mentality to kill or be killed. He even killed his own brother at age 10 just for not sharing food. He was also horrendous when it came to tormenting his betrayers. Some ways include pouring molten silver down their throats and sawing people in half while they were still alive. Oh, and he killed 75% of the population of Iran and tried to commit an entire genocide. Yeah, the list goes on, but so does this list, and there is more to come, so let's go. Number 6. Talat Pasha. Pasha was the Grand Vizier to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century and was the main architect of the Armenian genocide. When Armenian families were evicted from their homes in 1915, his signature was on the orders. On April 24th, they executed several hundred intellectuals in order to begin Turkifying the country. Many were sent through the Mesopotamian desert on death marches without food or water after being stripped naked so the sun would just boil them alive. Anyone who stopped walking was shot. He also created a special organization made of killers and ex-convicts who were ordered to carry out the liquidation of the Christian elements. They drowned people in rivers, threw civilians off cliffs, even crucified and burned people alive. Yup, this happened in the 1900s, by the way. So there are about 600,000 to 1.5 million reasons we wish this man never existed, because that is how many people Pasha was responsible for killing. Ooh, man. Number 5. Idi Amin. General Idi Amin staged a coup on January 25th, 1971 and forced Uganda's first Prime Minister Milton Obote into exile. From there, he created a reign of terror that abused Uganda's freedom after more than 70 years of British rule. Amin organized mass executions of Akoli and Lango Christian tribes who were loyal to Obote. He terrorized his own country with internal security forces whose main purpose was to eliminate those who opposed him. His brutality also resulted in the collapse of the economy. This man just seemed like he just didn't have a single good bone in his body. He was also rumored to have eaten human flesh, and his vicious and inhumane rule resulted in the death of 300,000 civilians. Eventually Amin was forced to flee and sought refuge in Saudi Arabia, though he was never punished for his crimes and died in 2003 due to organ failure. So he got away with it, essentially. Number 4, Pol Pot. You'd think a leader's job would be to protect and serve their country with love and respect, but I guess Pol Pot didn't see it that way. Originally named Salasar, Pot was the leader of the Khmer Rouge totalitarian regime during 1975 to 79 in Cambodia, though technically longer. It was a radical communist government who caused the death of more than 2 million people through forced labor, starvation, disease, torment, persecution, and execution. He wanted to purify society and wanted to extinguish capitalism, Western culture, city life, religion, and all foreign influences in order to form a pure communist regime. All media outlets, along with embassies and external medical help, were refused, and essentially he barricaded Cambodia into their own little world. Education was halted, healthcare eliminated. It was crazy. The people were forced into slave labor on the killing fields, only allowed 180 grams of rice a day. Deadly purges were conducted to eliminate remnants of the old society, including monks, police, doctors, lawyers, teachers, ex-soldiers along with their families, and former government officials. His cruelty and madness knew no bounds. It took years for him to finally be put under house arrest by his peers and was never truly punished for his crimes against humanity. He died of a heart attack in 1998 following his arrest. So, yeah. And we're reaching our top 3. I bet you thought number 3 was gonna be number 1. Nope, there were worse people than him, believe it or not. Number 3, we have Adolf. I can't say his last name because apparently YouTube won't let me, which is ridiculous. He's not Voldemort, but you know who I'm talking about, that really evil German guy. Yeah. I don't really need to go into detail here unless you don't know about one of the most infamous genocides to take place in all of history. Along with the amount of people Adolf's army killed in World War II, his warped and disgusting worldview resulted in the destruction of more than 6 million lives, mainly those of Jewish descent, but LGBTQ, political prisoners, and basically anyone he and his followers deemed a lesser human. He was the personification of hatred and led the world into one of the most deadly wars to date. We should also give a shout out to all of his henchmen who served underneath him, all working together to enact one of the cruelest moments in history. If he hadn't been born, who knows if it would have happened anyways due to political and social tensions of the time, but maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't have happened at all, and all those lives would still be around today. Number 2, guys, like I knew he was bad, but dug deep today, and I would never thought I would say this, but number 2, Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin made his own henchmen disappear in photos, and boy do we wish it was him instead. Stalin was the premier of the Soviet Union and was responsible for the deaths of more than 20 million of his own people, double that if you count World War II. He ruled for 30 years and ruled with an iron fist, eliminating anyone who opposed him, and as you can guess, there were many. In 1927 to 1929, he had 1 million people exiled or imprisoned, 9 to 11 million were forced off their lands, and 3 million peasants were arrested or exiled in the mass collectivization program. 6 to 7 million were killed by artificial famine in the 1930s. During 1936 to 1938, he executed approximately 750,000 during the Great Terror, a brutal political campaign to remove dissenters and any others he considered a threat. He was so paranoid. This guy had no regard for human life whatsoever. While the world was focused on Adolf, he was doing all of this, and he was fighting on the Allies' side, though we started supporting Hitler, and then he came onto our side. Anyways. It is estimated that Stalin orchestrated the deaths of 60 million people, which means about 40,000 people died every week during his reign. Need I say more? And if you think that's bad. Number 1 spot, Mao Zedong. Ready? I don't think anyone can be. Mao Zedong during 1966 to 1976 turned China into a house of fear by eradicating 65 million people. In his attempt for a socialist China, he killed anyone that got in his way, kind of like Stalin, through execution and mass starvation. His biggest threat was the intellect, and revered Emperor Xi Huang, who buried 460 scholars and sought to surpass him by burying alive 46,000 scholars. Yeah, my stomach turned when I read that. That's awful. He coined his operation the Great Leap Forward. To combat rising resistance, he created the Red Army, composed of girls and boys from the ages of 14 to 21 to roam cities and target enemies of the state, especially their teachers. He would make the teachers wear dunce hats, cover their faces with ink, and make them crawl on all fours and bark like dogs. He also expanded a system of 1,000 forced labor camps. Most amazing fam, I could go on, but I honestly don't have room. It just seems like there's no end to all the awful things that he did. For all these reasons and more, Mao is of course in our #1 spot.